Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Did Shakespeare. My name is Cassidy Cash. We think about arts and literature as being separate from subjects like math, science, and law, but that's really a modern invention. The idea of taking subjects and compartmentalizing them down to where you only study math or you only study literature and you only study art. And this entire concept of being like an arts person or a literature person and not really being able to overlap artsy things and STEM-based things is a modern mindset, which means when we study things like William Shakespeare and we look at the law language and the legal language in plays like Comedy of Errors and Twelfth Night, it is a mistake to apply 21st century culture to 16th century England and think that it's out of place for William Shakespeare to know law. But to make this case and to show you exactly how intertwined education was in the 16th century, this week we'll be asking, did Shakespeare perform for lawyers? In the late 1500s and early 1600s, the expanse of Shakespeare's 52 years on Earth, the law study and theater study kind of went hand in hand. Law students would actually put on performances to practice their litigation skills. Because if you think about it, presenting a case in court is a lot like performing on stage. And so lawyers who were involved in getting their education, so they're not quite lawyers yet, they haven't sat for the bar, they're not actually lawyers, but they're students, they would practice what they had learned and demonstrate their skill in the courtroom by putting on theater productions. Being the contemporary-minded person that William Shakespeare was, and always keeping an eye out for what his potential patrons would want to see and would resonate with, Shakespeare included a lot of legal language in his plays because he was performing them for these people that would care about law. But why is that? There were four inns at court, and what these were basically organizations where people could come to get legal education. There were four main ones in London during this time period. There was, and these are in no certain order, there was Lincoln's Inn, Gray's Inn, Inner Temple, and Middle Temple. Three of these four can actually be seen on the theater maps of London that I have created and you may have seen on my social pages. Down at the bottom in the show notes, there's a link to an article on my website where you can get this. But on the map, you can see that these inns were located in and around all of the other theaters and are included as a type of theater that was going on in Shakespeare's lifetime. Now, these societies began in the early Middle Ages, but they would go on to rival organizations like Oxford and Cambridge as a kind of third university specifically for the study of law. By the mid-13th century, there was a problem of legal education in England, and these inns at court were voluntary organizations that were set up to provide education that would create men who were literate in the law, but they were laymen. And so this was kind of society's answer to a lack of legal education, was to create these inns at court. So they were highly respected institutions for people that wanted to study law. What about the theater? How does this all tie back to Shakespeare? Well, the inns of court were established for the training of London's lawyers, but this period saw the students at these law institutions acting in plays and organizing masques to celebrate Christmas and other winter holidays. They would open up the inn's hall and they were required to attend a meal there. And so they would often stage a play as a kind of entertainment over their supper. They would sometimes organize plays by the students themselves, and other times they would have visiting players bring their companies in and perform there. Most famously, in 1594, the Lord Chamberlain's men put on Shakespeare's The Comedy of Errors at Gray's Inn, and it was Shakespeare's Twelfth Night that was staged at Middle Temple in 1602. Places like Gray's Inn was a fashionable place for wealthy people to send their children to go to school. And these wealthy patrons included people that Shakespeare wanted to impress because he wanted these people to support his work as a playwright. And so by going there and putting on plays, he was literally courting patrons for his own work. Some of the people he was trying to impress included Francis Bacon, Sir Walter Raleigh, and the Earl of Southampton. So we mentioned that in 1594, Shakespeare staged the Comedy of Errors at Gray's Inn. This was actually the very first staging of the Comedy of Errors, and we can assume it was intentionally designed to be seen and appreciated by lawyers, since Shakespeare hadn't performed it anywhere else before then. He wrote it to be performed here, which can explain some of the law language that gets included in Comedy of Errors. The performance was so well received that the audience was said to have been riotous. And afterwards, the lawyers actually staged a mock trial to arraign the culprit who had created the, quote, Night of Errors. So it was a big success. They were impressed with Shakespeare's Comedy of Errors, and he did a good job of entertaining the law-minded individuals that his play was performed before. In an interview with Lucy Nordberg in 2017, Jessica Winston describes the legal connection between Shakespeare and the Inns at Court by explaining, quote, the lovers of plays would have been part of the Twelfth Night audience, the kind of men at the Inns of Court in the 1600s, but especially at the Middle Temple, often wrote poetry and were often mean-spirited with each other as well as witty. They had a similar fondness for witty, biting satire, and they had similar personalities, often characterized by volatile tempers and intellectual and egotistical discontentedness with society and the follies of others. She goes on to compare this personality type with the character of Malvolio when they shame him in the play, which is often taken to be a satire on Puritans. And it's this kind of mean-spiritedness that could also have been appealing to the same audience. Shakespeare's most famous mention of Middle Temple is in a scene from Henry VI, Part 1 in the Temple Gardens. That's the scene where the factions of York and Lancaster are sowing the seeds of civil war. You can see it brewing. And when they pluck roses in the garden, one of them takes a red rose and one of them takes a white rose. So you can see the myth of the two houses already taking shape. Now, because it's held in a garden, this is kind of the ideal place where everybody should be obeying the law. And it's a scene where actually the men ultimately disregard the law. Somerset says, quote, faith, I have been a truant in the law and never yet could frame my will to it, and therefore frame the law unto my will. Some historians look at that line and suggest that Shakespeare is idealizing the inn, which would be appropriate when you're trying to impress the members of that same inn. The largest of the four main inns at court became Gray's Inn. There were two major players who helped Gray's Inn become the biggest, but at one point they had more than 200 barristers recorded as members. And it was during Shakespeare's period that the inn became noted for the masques and revels that it threw. William Shakespeare is believed to have performed the Comedy of Errors here the very first time. And that might be why, is because Gray's was the biggest. Now, you might be wondering, why are they going to the Inns at Court to perform these plays instead of going over to the theater? If theater was so popular, why weren't they just going as a group to the place where the theaters were? Well, you have to remember that it wasn't until 1576 to 1577 that James Burbage first built the very first purpose-built theater, which was called the Theater. Before that, plays were performed in any kind of public venue that wanted them or that was willing to pay them. They were often staged in public places, anywhere that people wanted them or that they would pay for them. It was in public halls or at the homes of wealthy individuals, or for the monarchy, they had them out to perform at court, which is the same thing as having, people out at your great hall, when you're a monarch. You can see from this little bit of history that not only was it quite normal for Shakespeare to perform his plays outside of a proper playhouse and theater and to go to places like the Inns at Court or a Traveler's Inn to perform his plays, but the legal language that we see in his plays is indicative of the kind of research and education that was necessary for Shakespeare to court the people who had the money to support his productions. He was very shrewd, and he was putting the kind of in-depth language and intellect that would be needed into his plays in order to court them and make them like him. He looks knowledgeable. He's one of us, they could say. He had to win their attention and attract the favor of their members to stay in business. That's it for this week here at Did Shakespeare. I'm Cassidy Cash. I hope you enjoyed this video and that you learned something new about the Bard. If you liked this video, please hit like and subscribe. As Shakespeareans, we love our friends, so please become our friend and hit subscribe. And if you would like to sign up for that Shakespeare Girl newsletter that I send out every Monday, I give away all of my freebies, including some of the ones that are for sale in that Shakespeare shop, to people that are on the newsletter list. The one that you would be most interested in if you liked this video would be the theater map of London. It's a hand illustrated map that I made of the city of London and the theaters that were popular in Shakespeare's day. It doesn't include every single one, but it does include most of the 4 Inns at Court we mentioned in today's video. If you would like to download that, you can join the newsletter using the link below this video, and I'll send you the map for free. And if you don't want to sign up for the newsletter, it is for sale in that Shakespeare shop for $5. That's US dollars. And you can download that over there. Stay tuned for the next podcast episode coming up on Monday. That will hit the airwaves at 8 a.m. US Central Time. And you can find it on iTunes, Google Play, TuneIn, and Stitcher. Don't forget to visit castofcash.com to learn more about me and to learn more about Shakespeare. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.